Greetings, this is Jazz for Jazz Reviews with the latest take on the survival horror genre. This is my review for The Evil Within. Directed by survival horror's maker, if you like, Shinji Mikami, this may be the spiritual successor to the original Resident Evils, and it all begins in a scene that horror fans should find familiar. From there on in, the real world becomes as unclear and deluded as the enemies you'll face. It attempts to tell a psychologically unsettling tale of horror, more akin to that of Silent Hill. Audio tapes and journal entries can be found to build its backstory, but the narrative is twisted out of all proportions. Is this intelligent suspense and horrifying storytelling? No. What could have provided for some truly psychologically horrifying moments is poorly glued together on a simplistic scene-by-scene basis. The main character, Detective Sebastian Castellanos, actually subtracts from the experience, uttering words of absolute meaningless, emotionless filler.
There's something wrong with this place.
Is she alright?
What is going on here?
But is it scary? Its grotesque imagery is presented without context, but does well in chasing shock value. You'll be tossed into a world of mutilation, mutation, and elaborate swimming pools of blood and gore. There's hectic chase segments involving the spider-like screeching freak, or sadist chainsaw boss, and all without much warning.
What is it with you?
Through a massive range of environments, this is the work of developers that put a lot of love into its extremely detailed level design. The black bars on screen are a deliberate design choice for purposes of immersion. Personally though, I feel it compresses much of the game's demonic charm, as my eyes strain to take in the finer details. Whilst the atmosphere can succeed in building expectations, the real tension lies within the constraints of combat. That's the last thing horror fans want to hear, but the game does very well in creating desperate situations. Ammo and supplies are hugely scarce, forcing the player to plan their every move and use the game's traps against the haunted and bosses themselves. I was constantly on edge, to the point of feeling very uncomfortable in its restricted shooting mechanics and camera angles. Gameplay becomes rather claustrophobic, creating for some awesome moments that are beyond stressful. The Agony crossbow also feeds in for some tactical gameplay. You can set up devious explosive and electric bolt traps, or simply harpoon enemies through the head. This is easily the most powerful tool in your arsenal, filtering into almost all of your plans, because planning is the main crux of the game. Every bullet counts, and even the smallest of elements can jeopardize the entire plan. It's a punishing but satisfying case of dying a hell of a lot, and retrying till you perfect the plan. Because the game will never give away its methods, this is classic of the survival horror genre. But as with the more attempts it takes to beat a particular scenario and boss, the horror factor is hugely impacted, and its bosses become all too familiar. But it is a very difficult game to master, and a big chunk of its gameplay is dedicated to trial and error. Some players will find this frustrating, but that shouldn't take away from the title. It requires players to think on their feet, improvising when the plan turns to shit. There is always an element of risk. Disarming traps will award parts that you can use to craft crossbow bolts, but some traps need to be handled with the utmost care. Sneaking and stabbing the abominations that stand in your way can help to reduce the carnage you'll face afterwards. You can throw bottles at the undead's faces, or more suitably smash them elsewhere to provide for a distraction. Hiding in or under beds, lockers, and closets can also prove useful. But the Evil Within does not consistently allow for stealth, and its enemies will either be completely brain dead to your location, or stand fully aware of your presence regardless of how many bottles are thrown. Stealth often takes a backseat, as the effective and certainly most fun mode of playing is the full-on balls-out approach of running past enemies and triggering traps when appropriate. Sebastian is extremely unfit, however, and the sprint gauge will diminish in seconds. Mixed in with shotguns, a revolver, and a sniper are the one-hit kill fire torches and axes that can be looted from dead bodies. But be sure to burn enemies where they die, as they can come back to haunt you otherwise. The upgrade system ties in for some level of control over your survival. Health, reload speed, damage, stamina, or clip capacity are the type of elements you can expect to alter throughout your playthrough, provided you've collected enough brain juice first, that is. The game sifts back and forth from the Asylum hub, in which you can conduct upgrade business and save your game. Checkpoints are fairly forgiving for a survival game, as are the light puzzles you'll come across in some chapters. Graphically speaking, the game's superior lighting and filters help to complete the game's atmosphere, with an audio design in 7.1 surround sound that does well in directing the player away from potentially lethal enemies. The id Tech 5 engine features overlapping shadows of varying intensity, which are visually brilliant across the board, but frame rate drop drops are very much a problem, which is caused less by the number of enemies on screen, but more the compacted, condensed sections at very specific areas of the map. Frames peak at both 30 frames for the Xbox One, running at 900p resolution, and the PlayStation 4 at 1080p. With debug commands on PC, you can de-restrict the frame rate cap and compulsory black bars, but its poor optimization is just something you've got to deal with, unfortunately. All in all, however, most horror fans will enjoy what the game has to offer. This should have been the sequel to Resident Evil 4. Evil Within is a love letter to Shinji Mikami fans. Its dated design is packed with similar environments and nods to the horror games of old, and the game is painfully intimate in its unique boss moments. But seasoned horror fans may find disappointment. It lacks the substance needed to tie together its potentially disturbing moments. It's down to the players to fill in the gaps and deal with their own personal pressures in gameplay. You will get your money's worth, however, with a playthrough netting 15 to 20 hours of gameplay time. But taking into account the ridiculous amount of times you will die and replay the same segments over and over again. I issue The Evil Within 7.5 out of 10. This has been Jazz for Jazz Reviews, and this has been my review for The Evil Within. If you haven't already seen my take on Alien Isolation and Shadows of Mordor, then there's reviews you can watch for those titles too. Please do let me know exactly what you thought of the review. But until next time, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the comments.